Every king needs soldiers, men who will stand beside him when the world turns hostile, men who will follow orders without question and keep secrets without breaking, men whose loyalty is not bought with money but earned through years of shared history. Frank Lucas understood this truth from the very beginning of his rise, and when he needed soldiers, he did not look to Harlem. He looked south, to the red clay roads of North Carolina, to the tobacco farms and small towns where he had grown up, to the men who had known him before he was anyone, before the money, before the power, before the name Frank Lucas meant anything at all. He called them his country boys. The first of them arrived in Harlem in the early days of Frank's operation, his cousin Hubert, a childhood friend named Terence, another cousin whose name was Melvin, but everyone called Junior. These were men who had worked the fields since they could walk, men who had learned early that life was hard and survival required toughness. They came to New York with nothing but the clothes they wore and Frank's promise that he would take care of them. Frank kept that promise. He gave them jobs in his organization. He taught them how things worked in the city. He molded them into something they had never been in North Carolina. Soldiers, earners, men of consequence. Over the years, the country boys became the backbone of Frank's empire. They held the most sensitive positions. They handled the most important tasks. They knew things that Frank would never trust to anyone born and raised in New York. Because in Frank's mind, city people were complicated. They had divided loyalties. They talked too much. They could be bought or turned or manipulated. But the country boys, they were simple in the best sense of the word, loyal to Frank because Frank was loyal to them, trustworthy because trust was the only currency they had ever known. By the time of the events on Lenox Avenue, Frank had brought nearly 24 men up from North Carolina. They lived together in apartments Frank provided. They worked together in operations Frank supervised. They formed a tight unit within the larger organization, a family within the family. But that closeness would be tested when the alliance with the Italian families required something Frank had never asked of them before: direct contact with people who saw the world very differently. The meeting was arranged 3 weeks after Lenox Avenue. The old man from the social club had done his research. He had identified the group that had attacked Frank's operation. They were not part of any established family. They were independents, ambitious men who had decided to carve out their own territory without asking permission from anyone. The old man viewed this as an insult. These newcomers had disrupted the careful balance that existed between the established powers. They had attacked someone under his protection without seeking approval. They had violated rules that had kept the peace for decades. He proposed a joint operation, his men and Frank's men working together to send a message, to eliminate the threat that these independents represented, and to demonstrate that the alliance between the Italian families and Frank Lucas was real and formidable. Frank agreed, but he had one condition. His country boys would be part of the operation, not supporting from the sidelines, not waiting in the cars, front and center, equal partners. The old man hesitated. His people had traditions. They had ways of doing things that went back generations. They did not typically work side by side with outsiders, especially not outsiders from backgrounds so different from their own. But the old man was also pragmatic. He had seen what Frank's men could do. He had heard the reports from 116th Street and Lenox Avenue. These country boys might not fit the traditional mold, but they were effective. And in the end, effectiveness was what mattered. The meeting to plan the operation took place in a warehouse in Brooklyn, neutral territory, a place where neither side had advantage or home field confidence. Frank arrived with 6 of his country boys, his cousin Hubert, Terence, Jr., 3 others who had proven themselves over years of service. They wore their best suits. They had been briefed on protocol and expectations. They knew how important this meeting was. The Italians sent 8 men, younger members of the organization, men who would actually be participating in the operation. They arrived separately, in expensive cars, wearing clothes that cost more than most of the country boys had ever made in a month back in North Carolina. The tension was immediate. The Italian soldiers looked at Frank's men with expressions that ranged from skepticism to something closer to contempt. These were country people, farmers, men without sophistication or breeding. What could they possibly contribute to an operation of this magnitude? Hubert felt the judgment. He had grown up with judgment. White landowners who looked down on his family, town officials who treated them like second-class citizens. He knew that look, and something in him wanted to respond to it. Frank noticed. He put a hand on Hubert's shoulder, brief, subtle, a reminder, we are here for business. Nothing else matters. The meeting began awkwardly. The Italian leading the discussion explained the plan. The Independents had a headquarters in a building in Queens. They would hit it on a Tuesday night when most of their people were there. Overwhelming force, swift action, a clear message. One of the Italian soldiers interrupted. He gestured toward the country boys. Are we sure about this? These men look like they just got off a bus from somewhere. How do we know they can handle themselves? The room went silent. Frank felt Hubert tense beside him. Terence's jaw tightened. Junior's hands curled into fists at his sides. This was the moment that would define everything that came after. Frank spoke calmly. My men have been handling themselves since before most of you were born. They survived things you cannot imagine. They came to this city with nothing and helped build something that your boss considers worth protecting. If that is not enough for you, we can leave right now. And you can explain to the old man why his alliance fell apart because of your disrespect. The Italian who had spoken looked like he wanted to respond. But another man, older, clearly senior among the group, raised his hand. Enough. The old man trusts these people. That is enough for me. If it is not enough for you, perhaps you should wait in the car. The tension remained, but it shifted. The planning continued. Roles were assigned. The country boys would handle the rear entrance. The Italians would take the front. Timing would be synchronized to the second. Any problems, any complications, both groups would support each other immediately. No hesitation, no second guessing. What happened in Queens 3 nights later would become the stuff of legend in certain circles. The operation was executed flawlessly. The country boys performed not just adequately, but brilliantly. When the Italian team ran into unexpected resistance at the front entrance, it was